everyone. I'm Shalini, your host for today's podcast session on the eLearning Champion Pod. I'm very thrilled to have with us Rance Greene, who is the founder of needastory.com and the School of Story Design for those who struggle with storytelling at work. And his methodology, story design, it gives leaders and talent development professionals a very systematic and creative way for discovering who their audience is and how to persuade them to take action on new ideas. So it's a very exciting space. And he helps leadership teams, entrepreneurs, and instruction designers discover that each of them is uniquely equipped to tell the best story for their audiences. Rance is also the author of Instructional Story Design, a practical guide for developing stories that train. And Rance trains, teaches, coaches, speaks, and writes often on the benefits of using stories to connect people to one another. So, Rance, a very warm welcome to you once again. And we're really excited to have you join us today.
Thank you so much, Shalini. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, Rance, I'd like to kickstart this session with the first question. Can you tell us a little bit more about your instructional story design methodology? I mean, we all have used storytelling in our e-learning courses and in our classroom sessions. So just wanted to know a little bit more about this very specific methodology.
Sure. So, Shalani, when you were introducing me, you used the word uniquely prepared. So, when this particular audience, your audience of instructional designers are uniquely prepared to deliver a story-based course to their learners. You mentioned my book, that's it right there, Instructional Story Design.
Okay.
And the book actually goes through this methodology in great depth. But to give you just a snapshot of what the methodology is, um, the core of instructional story design is the story design model. So let me describe what that is. And I think that will help your listening audience to really grasp what the instructional story design methodology is all about. So if you think of story at the top and action at the bottom, so you have this is the story you want to write for training. This is the action you want people to take as a result of training. We want to fill in this space in the middle to make sure that our story is concretely connected to the action we want people to take, right? We don't want some random story. We don't
Right.
want some fluffy story in our training. We need our training to be efficient, slim, and focused. So that story has to contribute to that bottom action that we want people to take.
Right.
So, Shalini, may I ask you a question?
Please.
What do you think of as the elements of a story? Like think about stories that you watch, that you read,
Right.
stories that you tell. What are the elements that make a story a story?
A great plot,
Yes.
characters we can relate to, or maybe not,
Hmm.
sometimes not even relate to, but compelling characters.
Yes.
And yeah, a happy ending, preferably.
That's awesome. Yes. So I'm so glad that you used the word relatable because um, that is how I define the two essential elements of a story for training. So let's fill in this gap where story is at the top, action is at the bottom, with two of the story elements that must be present in a story for training. And the first one is, you nailed it, relatable characters. Relatable characters. And I use the word relatable because our learning audience has to have some empathy for the characters in our story for training, or they're not going to care. Not going to care
Right.
what happens to those characters. The other element of story that must be present, besides relatable characters, is strong conflict.
Oh, yes.
Strong conflict. Think about the stories that you love to watch.
Right.
Those stories contain a lot of conflict in them. And often there are many conflicts along the way that keep you kind of, hanging on. You
Right.
want to stay so that you see what happens to these people. And I use the word strong because I want to remind instructional designers, especially, that it must be present. Conflict must be present. And it needs to
Right.
be as strong as possible. Often, I think instructional designers, we're an accommodating and generous bunch of people, and we like to show people the exact way to do things. And so introducing conflict might be a little bit uncomfortable, because we want to just show like this shining example of how everything goes so well in this perfect world that nobody actually
Right.
lives in. So,
Right. Right.
relatable characters in strong conflict produce this wonderful thing inside of us. When you think about when you're watching a story and you see characters that you like and they're in conflict, how does that make you feel?
Right. You'll be rooting for the good guys and hoping they'll find a resolution, and you're
Mhm.
emotionally invested in whatever they are facing because it
Yes.
pulls you in. The story pulls you in, and you start walking in their shoes.
Yes, yes, you bring up so many good points. Yeah, you're walking in their shoes. Stories kind of act like a flight simulator.
Right.
The things that are happening in the story are preparing you for real life,
Mhm.
because you're kind of living it through the characters. That's a wonderful attribute of stories. Also, you use the word hope. You're hoping that these characters will find some resolution. So when you put relatable characters in strong conflict, what I like to call that, what those equal, is a desire for resolution. And it is, you're right, it's an emotional response, a desire for resolution. So relatable characters, strong conflict equals a desire for resolution within the person who's watching that story.
Right.
Once you've achieved a desire for resolution in training, the story has done its work.
Hmm.
Now we are riveted. We cannot wait to see how this story ends, but the story ends at the height of that conflict. And now that that desire for resolution has been sparked, we want to know how this ends. The next piece in the story design model is instruction. Instruction. And that instruction is what completes the connection between the story and the action. So we have relatable characters and strong conflict, which equals, next block down, a desire for resolution. Once that desire for resolution has been sparked, we're open now to receive instruction. We're on the edge of our seats to receive instruction, which then motivates us to take the action that the training was developed for in the first place. But that instruction does need to be designed in a way that really maximizes that desire for resolution. So now we can ask questions about the story. What was
Right.
going on? Why was this conflict in the story? How do you feel about it? Why do you feel that way? What would you do instead? And all of a sudden, this process of self-discovery begins in the
Right.
training with story at the center stage of it. So what are your thoughts
Wow.
about that model so far?
Yeah, it sounds fantastic because I hadn't thought of so many levels. For me, it was just the plot and preferably a happy ending and somehow pulling the learner in to root for whoever's dealing with the whatever is happening out there. But you've touched on a very important point, Rance, that there should be a strong need for resolution. You know, um, the
Yes.
learner should be involved enough to want a resolution. you know,
Yes.
and it won't work if it's just something that doesn't pull them in, draw them in
Right.
fully.
Right. And Shalini, you're not alone in wanting a happy ending. That's what we all want, you know. But if you provide the happy ending in the story, the desire for resolution is gone.
Right.
Okay,
Towards
you've
the very
resolved it
end,
for me.
perhaps. Yeah.
So yeah, like so if you do want to share a story that shows kind of like the perfect world, how everything
Mhm.
should go, you should wait until after instruction has happened, after they
Right.
have critically thought about the story, solved problems based on the story, and gotten feedback on their work. Then they are ready to see, okay, how this might play out. But really, as you're instructing, think about this. So let's say that, let me give you an example of that kind of like brings all of this together. Let's say that you're training managers, and these are new managers. These are newly promoted managers. They used to be like individual contributors, but now they've been promoted to manager, and some of them are even like managing the teams that they used to be on. So some
Right.
unique challenges there for this group of
Right.
people. And so the story might go something like this. Maggie is a new manager. She was recently promoted from being an individual contributor. She was, she was a great performer. And so she has now been promoted to managing people who were on her own team. Her own team has been pretty enthusiastic to support her. And she's about 2 months in to leading this team. At first, things were going great. And all of a sudden, they're starting to miss deadlines, and people seem to be silent. So she does what every good manager would do. She has a meeting and she invites everybody to the meeting, and she
Right.
tells everybody, hey guys, we've been missing some deadlines here. Um, what's going on? Nobody says anything. Crickets. She's like, is there something that I can do to help? Finally, Lee speaks up. And Lee says, Maggie, we're just adjusting. We're just adjusting. Brianna speaks up. Yeah, yeah, we'll get back on it. She says, well, is there anything I can do to help us out? Nobody says anything, and she dismisses everybody. It's kind of awkward. And then at the very end of the meeting, when everybody else has left, um, Jared comes up to her and says, Maggie, I didn't want to say this in front of everybody, but um, I think that, Lee, I see Lee on YouTube all the time during work, and Brianna, she's got this side job as a real estate agent, and she's like constantly making appointments during work hours.
Mhm.
And I really feel like me and Bobby are like picking up the slack for everybody. Maggie couldn't believe this. What? How long has this been going on? She asks. Oh, about a month, he says. A month? Well, why didn't you say something? Well, I figured, as long as the work was getting done, that was what was most important to you. Maggie goes back to her office. This is not what she was expecting management to be like. Now, if that was the story for training, and I were to ask you, Shalini, how do you think Maggie feels right now? What would you say?
Not too happy, confused, wondering if she
Mm,
had taken the right step by going along that career path, because things were working perfectly well before for her. And
right.
suddenly there are all these obstacles to progress. And
Yes,
and
yes,
and the team dynamics have gone for a toss,
yes.
seemingly. So all of which would be highly upsetting.
Yeah, yeah. So you've given some good, plausible reasons or feelings that she might be feeling, and some plausible reasons why she might be feeling that way. Can you think of anything that she might do in the future, now that she knows kind of the state of things? What should she do next? In your opinion, what should she do next?
Well, she needs to have those difficult conversations, but she may not be
Ah,
ready for it
hmm.
because
And
those were
should
her
she,
peers till just a month back.
right, right. Should she meet together, with the whole team again? How would you handle it if you were in her shoes?
I would certainly not bring it up with the whole team. I would take it up
Okay,
privately, one on one.
good. Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah,
I would still be walking on eggshells because they are my peers. They were my peers till just a month back. So it's a very delicate situation and a great deal of sensitivity is required.
yes.
So yeah.
Good, good. Now, let's take a break from that. Let
Mhm.
me ask you, um, how did you feel as I was telling you the story and as you were kind of like thinking about the story and figuring things out?
Yeah, I felt a lot of empathy for Maggie actually,
Hmm.
because here she was, probably a hard-earned promotion and expecting things to go really well, and then facing something like this very early on. So that
Yeah,
could be really, that would make her second guess all her choices,
yeah,
so on.
yeah. Good, good, Shalini. I mean, those are all awesome observations. So hopefully, if this were a course that you were taking, you would be very invested in figuring out how to help Maggie out, how to get
Right,
her out of this mess.
right,
Um, and so as you are reflecting on the story that just happened, which contained, as you said, you had empathy. So that was a relatable character. Maggie was a relatable character. She was in strong conflict, right? She was not really handling things very well. Something was going amiss even before this meeting. Somewhere along the way, she got out of step with best practices for managing, right?
right,
Or it wouldn't have gone as far as it had gone.
right,
And she needs a way forward from here. And so hopefully you are feeling that that conflict really helps you to stay engaged, to answer the questions such as reflecting on what just happened, especially the emotional part of it. Solving a problem, I asked you, what would you do in her place? That's a solve question. It's making you
right,
critically think about the story. I don't have to say much, right? I was being like, what would you
right,
do? What would you
right,
do? You know, and that gives you the impetus to start solving the problem. Then, I provide feedback to you, on your answer. And that is the cycle of story, reflect, solve, feedback. And then, once you've told that story once, you don't need to tell it again. Just
right,
reflect, solve, feedback. Okay, next action. Reflect, solve, feedback. Next thing I want to train you on, reflect, solve, feedback. That story remains in the center of that training as you are reflecting on it, solving problems based on the story, and then getting feedback on your work. And boy, the self-discovery that takes place in the story design way of doing it is
right.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah. You had me totally hooked to the story.
So I think in a nutshell, that would be the instructional story design methodology, and with a little example to go along with it.
Right, right. So, Rats, I was just wondering, is this really very different from the scenario-based kind of trainings that we develop?
So scenario-based training is a specific way of formatting the training in that I think there's a lot of definitions of scenario-based training. In my mind, scenario-based training is you get a short story, if you will, that leads to a decision point, And from that decision point, the story branches in whatever direction you have chosen, which ends in another decision point, and then the story branches again according to what you have chosen.
Mhm.
Um, Story design is, so that's scenario-based training. I would say that story design is a level below that, a more foundational skill, because in order to tell that story in each of those decision points, you're going to need some basic storytelling skills, story
Right,
writing skills. The
right,
challenge with scenario design is that you may avoid giving them the benefit of conflict because they may choose correctly every single time and never have the opportunity to experience conflict. So it may
right,
be a very conflict-less story in a scenario-based course. So
right.
when you're creating scenario-based courses, you really have to work hard to make sure that the conflict gets in there in the story itself.
Right, right. And if it is, and if you're talking about standalone scenarios to illustrate various training points, then it gets difficult to get the learner invested because those are characters they're meeting for the first time. Every time they're meeting a new character. So probably, as you said, you've got to work harder
Yes.
there.
Yes.
So,
So you that is so spot on, Shalini. The and an example of that would be, Jasmine receives um, a $50 gift card from a vendor. Should she take it? Like, sure, take it. I don't care, whatever. I don't know this. Like, do we care about Jasmine? No. Is the conflict even relevant? No, it's
right,
not even real life. So, yeah, you are totally spot on about that because these little things that we call scenarios do not have relatable characters. They just have a name, and the
right.
conflict is so surface level. I mean, it's very contrived.
Yeah, yeah. True, true that. Yeah, thanks, Rance, for that really great intro to your methodology by actually pulling me into your story. I can see why this works. I can totally see that. So, Rance, I was just wondering, can you share any success stories, on how this approach has transformed L&D initiatives?
Sure, sure. So I didn't always have my own business. I used to work in corporate and I was overseeing compliance training in a healthcare
Okay.
organization. And one of the areas of the company was a large enterprise, and one of the areas in the company was experiencing some compliance issues that were rather sensitive, things such as favoritism, um, and other issues that needed to
Right.
be addressed. And so the management of that area called us and said, "Hey, can you come and basically like slap people's hands and say, no, no, you shouldn't do that." And I was like, "No, we're not going to do that. But what we will do is bring you a story." So I created a story and it took place in a coffee shop.
Mm.
And the employees of the coffee shop were having issues such as quality, favoritism, perceived favoritism, um, and various other issues that mirrored the issues that were taking place in this company, but it was taking place in a coffee shop. And so we created the story. And I wasn't facilitating the story, but I designed it. I gave instructions to the facilitator. They took it, they told the story, and then they asked questions similar to the questions that I asked you, you know, and they were each assigned a character in the story, and they were to answer the questions based on who they were in the story.
Okay.
And so you had the owner of the coffee shop.
Hmm.
Well, the managers in the room may not have been the owner. Like they
Right,
might have been the janitor,
right.
or they may have been the barista. You know, the the answers, they begin to then answer the questions. And as they were solving problems for this little group over here in a coffee shop, they were solving their own problems.
Right.
And so then they were given feedback based on their solutions. 9 months later, after the training, we were contacted by the management, and they said, "We just want to thank you for coming down here and doing the training with us. Anytime we feel ourselves slipping back into old habits, we say to one another, 'Remember the coffee shop.'"
Wow.
That's the
About
power of a
impact.
well-told story. Yes, yes.
Yes.
So they didn't remember, bullet point number 6 on slide 3. Oh, remember, we shouldn't do that anymore. They remembered the story, and the story contained everything that was needed for behavior change.
Wow.
Um, so um, that was one of my first experiences in going full out with story design, that I saw a direct and such powerful impact. And so from then on, I was sold, and I was like, "Yeah, we're doing storytelling for every compliance training that goes out. Every compliance communication that goes out is going to be story based." And what happened is that the culture of compliance training changed from something that people dreaded
Hmm.
to something that people actually looked forward to, because they were excited about, you know, the the characters. Some of them were
Right.
playing the characters. I recruited some employees to play the characters.
Right.
And then it changed the culture of the company too, because after we began story-based training, we would do a periodic culture survey of the entire company.
Hmm.
Ethics and compliance rose to the top as
Wow.
the most valued aspect of the culture of our company.
Amazing.
Ethics and compliance
Yeah.
rose to the top because we had humanized it so much through storytelling that it
Right.
was naturally at the top of everybody's mind. People could say the names of the characters at
Mm.
lunch. They knew them so well. So
Wow.
that's my success story.
No, that's terrific, Raz. And I think the key word you used is humanized.
Mhm.
The human connect and a little bit of
Yes.
theater because they were all role playing, and
Yes.
that's the best way to really get into a person's walk in a person's shoes. So,
Yes. Yes.
Rance, it's amazing what you shared about compliance training rising to the top, because
Yes.
it's, as you said, it's the most dreaded uh, kind of
Yes.
training ever. And I wanted to ask you, do you think this storytelling, story design approach lends itself well to certain types of trainings? Where you mentioned behavioral change, wherever there is a need for behavioral change. So, are there any areas where you think it works particularly well, and some areas where you feel it could be an overkill?
Sure. I get asked that question a lot. Um, so any kind of business storytelling, training, presentations, vision, sharing a vision, any kind of message that you have in business, it only needs a story if change is required. If
Right,
change of some sort is required in the person who is listening to the message or taking the training.
correct.
Training, by definition, demands a behavior change. Like there has to be some sort of change. Otherwise, why are you training people?
Right.
So I would say any type of training qualifies for story design. A lot of people think of soft skills as a natural place for stories, or leadership topics as a way, a natural place for stories. I view compliance training as a very natural place for stories.
Right.
Um, Technical training. I have a lot of folks who have come through the school of story design, and they are technical trainers, and they
Mm,
want to know how to tell stories for technical training, application training,
wow.
software training,
Right.
safety training, and those types of courses benefit greatly from storytelling as well. Um, where you don't want to tell a story in business is where no change is really needed. So, like a status report.
Right.
If you're giving a status report, you're going around, everybody's, saying, you know, where the state of things are, then probably don't want to launch into a story at that moment.
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, a lot of training has become actionless, and more we have, and we'll talk about this in just a minute, but has become more of like, oh, let's just be aware of this. And so being aware of something does not necessarily necessitate a change. We're hoping for a change, but it's not explicit. And so, but that's the topic of, I think, some of the pitfalls that we fall into as instructional designers. So yeah, I would say any training qualifies for storytelling. Um, yeah, that's my
Yeah.
answer.
Thank you, Rance. And I like what you shared about, at any um meeting, a significant meeting, or when there are important announcements, or when there's a transformation that leadership is aiming for, it really begins with stories. It's not the hard data and the numbers that speak. It's really the
That's right.
story along with the numbers and the data, which,
That's right.
drives that impact and compare, catalyzes action, shall we say.
Totally true.
So,
Totally
yeah.
true. Yeah.
And thanks for clarifying that bit about where do you think it's applicable? Because, I tend to I think I went along with this popular opinion that probably, soft skills, behavioral training, compliance also. I was just trying to
Mhm.
think, how would I apply stories in, say, a training on tax, a software for something to do with
Mhm.
taxes, for instance. But
Mhm.
when you mentioned that a lot of technical trainers have been incorporating storytelling even in software application kind of courses, that's
Yes.
really something and
Yes.
quite eye-opening.
Yeah.
Right. So, Rance, how do you gather these stories, during the consultation stage in L&D? We're
Mhm.
running around trying to gather all the required inputs based on what is the desired learning outcome. And at that point, I think we all get hit with tons of information. So
Yeah.
how do you really, gather these stories that make this training come alive?
Yeah. Yeah. So I love that question because it's really at the heart of a lot of the pitfalls of instructional design and certainly instructional story design. When we go into conversations with stakeholders, I like how you put this here, the consultation phase, because we should perceive ourselves as consultants, not only, designers and developers, but as consultants to the business. And we are part of that business, we are the training part of that business. So when we go into a conversation with a stakeholder, initially, we're looking for three things. We want to know what the root problem is, what the business outcome is going to be as a result of training, and if training is the right solution.
Right.
And I would say if it is part of the solution, it's usually part of the solution. It is rarely the whole solution. There are so many factors at work that determine whether or not somebody actually takes action on what we're training them to do.
Right.
So during that first conversation, make sure you know what the root problem is, you know what the business outcome is going to be, it should be measurable, and if training is the ideal solution. And the way you can know
Right.
that is, does there need to be an increase in knowledge in order for the people to be able to do this? Do they need to get new skills? And do they need to adopt new attitudes? Right?
Right.
So knowledge, skills, and attitudes, KSA.
Right.
If so, then training is a good solution.
Right.
If not, make a recommendation and save yourself some time.
Right.
So
That's
know
true.
that going into that initial conversation. After that, then, once you've determined that training is a good solution, in your conversations with stakeholders, with subject matter experts especially, um, there's two things you want before you start designing. One is you want to know who you're designing for. So every new audience that I design for, whether I am going there in person to deliver the message, or I'm doing it virtually, or I'm creating an e-learning course for them, I want to know who they are. And I want to know more than just like their role, their title, the demographic stuff. I also
Right.
want to know what's going on at work right now. What's
Mm.
stressing these people out? What do they fear? What do they value?
Right.
How are circumstances at work affecting them? Because when they come into training, they're not coming in as just a brain. Like they're coming in as a whole
Whole
person to
person.
experience this. Yes, yes, exactly. Like the emotional part as well. They are emotional beings as well as intellectual beings. And the wonderful thing about stories is that they speak to both. You're exercising your mind and your emotions at the same time as you watch the story unfold. And that's one of the huge benefits of storytelling. So first you want to know who your audience is. The second thing you want to know is what you are training them to do. And Shalini, this amazes me every time when I get a group of instructional designers together, how difficult it is for them to do that. And we have kind of gotten into a rut of starting, like, first of all, leaning on learning objectives, right? So be aware of fill in the blank, understand fill in the blank.
Right.
You should know fill in the blank. Well, the problem with all of those things is that you can't do those things. There's no
Right.
action involved.
Right.
So a good comeback question to a subject matter expert, and I've had to do this, I can't even count how many times,
Mhm.
is okay, can you tell me, you know, what somebody who is aware of this does? What do they actually do? Can you like tell me a story about it? And I get them involved a bit in storytelling, and we make it really concrete, down to earth, very logical actions that people can take
Mhm.
who are aware of
Right.
this. So it drills down to observable actions. And I call this list of actions, get this, an action list.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
my team calls it an action list. I train my stakeholders to call it an action list because I want everybody in the room to know we are training people to do things.
Wow.
So know
That's
who your
great.
audience is and what you're training them to do.
I think using the right words really changes the perspective because suddenly it stops being something passive and something which demands a next step, or motivates or inspires a
Yes.
next step.
Yes.
Right.
Boy, I couldn't have put it better. That's such a great way to put it. And then once you have those things, you can use your audience profile to create relatable characters. And you can use your action list as the source of conflict. You can put your characters in conflict with these observable actions, and boom, you got a tailor-made story for that course.
Right. Wow. Okay, I can see how it all connects together. So,
Mhm.
Rance, I'm wondering when you talk to these subject matter experts, they share their stories. Do you also gather some prospective learners' stories? You know, something
Yes.
straight from the horse's mouth about what are their pain points, and because sometimes we end up talking just to the subject matter expert who conveys what they believe are the pain points of the target group, So
Hmm.
is there an additional step here? I know it's not always practical or feasible given the time constraints, but
Right.
how do you tackle this?
I would say most times I rely on the subject matter expert because I don't have direct access to the learners, but I have had occasions when I did, and when
Okay.
I did a full out learner analysis, which is very time consuming. So, if you have the time to do that, awesome. If not, just, ask those same questions of them and find out, I mean, sometimes I'm training the board of directors. Like, I'm not going to get an audience with the board of directors. So I have to rely on legal or other people who interact
Right,
with the board to
right.
find out who they are. Sometimes I will Google learners. Like this
Hmm.
board of directors, I Googled them. I found out who they were, where they went to school, and just to get a sense, because it was a small group, just to get a
Right,
sense of where they all were. They had written books. They were, famous people. So it
right.
was easy to find out who these learners were. But yeah, usually I do rely on the subject matter expert to provide that necessary information so that I can create really relatable characters for my
Right.
story.
So do you let them know that you are going to create these characters based on the diverse perspectives that they may be sharing with you? Because that probably will help them see what kind of inputs they need to give you better. Or do you just let them,
So
share?
a lot of times what happens is I'll rope them into storytelling and they don't know it. Like I did showed you last time. I'm like, could you tell me a story about that? Like, let's give that person a name. All right, so let's say that Barry is this, sales associate. Where would he be when he might, you know, there might be an infraction of a competitive intelligence, right? You want to train these people on competitive intelligence. So let's talk about that. Where would Barry be? Okay, he might be in a restaurant, all right, and at a networking event. Okay, good. So then, what kind of conversations would he have when this competitive intelligence might come across his path? Well, he might be talking to this person from another company, and so they begin to tell the story without
Right,
even really knowing it. I'm like, you know what?
right.
That's a great story. Why don't we use that in the course?
Great, great. Wow. So there's a
And
lot
then a
of
lot of
investigative
times.
work that goes on, as part of the foundational work.
Well, you're doing it anyway. You're
Right,
doing that work anyway, so you might as well use it and make it concrete.
right.
Because once you get into the design, things go
Hmm.
very quick with story design. It's very
Right.
efficient
Hmm.
because you already have this model that you're following. You don't really have to put too much thought into how am I going to format this. You're going to have a story, you're going to reflect, you're going to solve, you're going to have feedback. You
Right,
have this model already in place. So
right.
all the work that you're doing on the front end makes
Mhm.
this other part just flow.
Right, right. So I can see where, it's both systematic and creative. So I can see where the structure comes and where the
Exactly.
creativity, aligns with it. And yeah, I think that's really impactful.
Yes, yes,
So,
that is so well put. And I think that a lot of people find comfort in the process and it frees them up to be more creative.
right, right. Yeah, thank you, Rance. It sounds like a fantastic methodology. And I have one more question. I really wish I could go on forever because I could just talk to you all night. It's evening here in India. It's night actually. But one final question. Um,
Yes.
so which you've kind of actually answered along the way, with this methodology, do you think it helps the L&D function become more strategic rather than just being order takers?
Yes, it does. In fact, I have a huge interest in helping L&D become more strategic partners. And instructional story design is such a holistic way of approaching instructional design that respects and builds relationships with stakeholders. Um, because you become intensely interested in how this is going to impact them personally as
Right.
well as the company.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you empathy for the subject matter expert who is caught up in their own world, living and breathing this one topic their whole day. They know all about privacy inside and out, and they are stuck in that world. And it's your privilege to come in and help them sort out what you actually want people to do when
Right.
somebody calls them and tries to social engineer them. You know, it is um, our privilege to really respect the learner and to give them an experience that respects their intelligence, their ability to critically think, to observe the story, to critically think about it, and solve problems based on it. And what I talked about compliance training earlier, um, our compliance training was performance based. And I don't know that I've seen a whole lot of compliance training that was performance based. A lot of it is just awareness,
Right.
but
Right.
it is performance based, and that's what people want. They want you to tell them what to do. Being aware of something doesn't change anybody.
Right.
It
I
might
know.
change a couple of people,
Right.
but teaching them what to do, giving them practice doing it in the course itself is a respectful and humanized way of approaching learning. And so all of those things added up really do accentuate the partnership that you can have within the business as a
Right.
problem, literally a problem solver and a consultant rather than somebody who just takes your stuff and makes it pretty.
Right. Right.
But you are a consultant and you are making a difference, a measurable difference in the company. So yes, I do believe that instructional story design accomplishes that.
Fantastic. It's a very beautiful way of putting it, Rance, that you really it's a privilege. This is the first time I've heard it being used in this
Mm,
sense. It being a privilege to be able to help our learners and without insulting their intelligence, because so often our
mm,
programs end up doing just that.
mm.
So that's a beautiful way of putting it. And yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you.
So, Rance, okay, I have another question. So, can you share something recent that you have developed? Uh, some recent initiative.
Yes, of course. We have last year we started this course, and it uses story design to teach instructional story design. So it's very meta, but it's called the Instructional Story Design Experience, and you can find it at schoolofstorydesign.com. And exciting news is that very recently we have partnered with another group called Parody Deals, where if you are logging into the School of Story Design from India,
Hmm.
then you receive a discount on
Oh,
the course, and the Parity Deals figures out what the appropriate discount is and all that stuff. So if instructional designers who are listening to your podcast or watching this video would like to visit schoolofstorydesign.com, our instructional story design course is actually available to you at a discounted rate. And we
great.
wanted to make that available to all areas of the world that otherwise might not be able to swing it. So very excited about that. And the course itself, it's a blended learning course. It took
Okay.
us 3 years to put it together.
Wow. I'm
So it's
intrigued. You
good.
use the story design methodology to teach instructional designers about story design. That's fantastic. It's
Yes.
like the Matrix.
Yes, it's incredibly meta. But the
Yeah.
my e-learning developer is amazing. She did a wonderful job putting the e-learning part together. I put together some videos made in Beyond and just professional videos.
Wow.
as well as a ton of downloadable resources that you actually use during the course. It's a 9-chapter, 6-week course, and you practice, 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 leading up to a capstone project where you build a story-based course. So if any of your
Wonderful.
listeners would like to join us, we would love to have them.
Yeah, this sounds like a fantastic opportunity to really dive deep into this methodology and
Yes.
see something come alive. So
Yes.
I'm sure our listeners who are from India would love to avail of this. And yeah, I'm sure there are other listeners from different parts of the world who would probably still want to go ahead and try this.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, Rance, I know I keep saying I have just one last question, but this time I really do have just one last question. What advice would you give L&D professionals who want to incorporate storytelling into training programs and, grow their careers in this field?
Yeah. I would say the number one piece of advice that I would give you is know your learners. Get intensely interested in who your learners are. Create an audience profile for that group, and you will begin to have empathy for them. You will begin to think, what could I design for these people who are going through this situation right now, who are dealing with these circumstances that would really respect them and give them an an opportunity to take a course that by the end of it, they will say, I am so glad that I took this course.
Right.
That's what I would say. My number
Wow.
one piece of advice. Get intensely curious about who you are training.
Wow. I think we talk a lot about measuring the effectiveness of training, but what you said just now is the acid test. If a learner can step
Mhm.
away saying, wow, I'm really glad I took that,
Yes.
that says a lot.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rance, for this session. And it's been really fascinating, this methodology and the possibilities, the opportunities that lie ahead, if we very deliberately and carefully integrate this into our L&D initiatives. So thank you for giving us a great peek into what goes behind the scenes and what is it that we all need to be focusing on to get the kind of outcomes that we desire. So
Yes.
thank you once again. And listeners, thank you for tuning in and do stay tuned in for our for our podcasts that are coming up next week. Thank you. Thank you, Rance, once again. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Shalini. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.